I stared at the message on my phone. A faint smirk curling at the corner of my lips. I should have felt anger, maybe frustration, but instead, there was just a strange, detached amusement. Enjoy your time being broke. Victor's taunting message read, shining mockingly on the screen. It was a reminder of the game he thought he was playing. The audacity. I almost laughed. If he only knew. My name is Maya, and at 29. I never expected to find myself parked outside an airport terminal, watching my husband's escape attempt unfold live on my laptop, coordinating the operation with the FBI. The irony was almost poetic. Victor thought he was pulling a fast one, draining what he believed were our personal accounts. The accounts he thought were empty. He had no idea. Those accounts had been empty for weeks, emptied. Yes, but not in the way he thought. No, we had prepared for this moment long before he decided he was invincible. Long before he started siphoning millions from his clients at the firm. Long before he started lying to me. Victor had always been the charming type. The kind who made you believe everything was in place. The kind who could convince you that a glass of wine at dinner was just that. A casual gesture. But then came the whispers, late nights at the office. Secretive phone calls, suspicious transfers. The cracks in his polished act started to show. When I found the first trace of his theft, I didn't confront him. Instead, I did what anyone with half a brain would do. I went straight to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I played my part in silence. All while he played his. That's when Agent Lara Stone entered the picture. To Victor, she was nothing more than a gorgeous new client, the kind of woman he couldn't resist. Little did he know, she was working with us. I shifted in my seat, feeling the cool breeze of the night air against the back of my neck as I watched the live feed. Victor was on his way to the gate, striding through the terminal with the woman he believed was his mistress. He couldn't have known how close we were. How every step he took was being watched by an army of agents. His arrogance made me almost pity him. Almost. My earpiece buzzed. Lara's voice, calm and steady, broke through. He's with her now. They're approaching security. I glanced at the screen. There he was, strolling through the airport, the woman clinging to his side like a lifeline. The way he held her waist. So confident, so smug. He had no idea. Remember, I spoke into my mic. My voice steady. He's carrying the backup drive with all the transaction records. Don't let him get rid of it. Copy that. Lara responded. The pieces were all in place now. Victor thought he was outsmarting me. But the truth was, he had walked right into a trap I set for him months ago. Every little detail had been calculated. Down to the last second. I almost felt sorry for him. Watching him swagger through the airport with that look of satisfaction on his face. But then I remembered. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about making sure he paid for what he'd done. The flicker of the screen caught my attention. Victor had glanced at his phone. Probably checking the time. His flight, no doubt, was waiting. He was getting anxious. His confidence was beginning to crack. I leaned back in my seat, fingers tapping rhythmically on the laptop keyboard, feeling the rush of the moment. It was almost over, and despite everything, despite the way he'd betrayed me, the way he'd shattered every piece of trust between us, I couldn't help but feel a small pang of sadness. Had it all been a lie? Every moment we shared, every plan for the future? I thought about the night we met, the late-night dinners at work, the way he'd looked at me when I was sick, the time he held my hand at my father's funeral. Was it all part of his game? Victor had thought I wouldn't see it coming. But I had. I always did. And now, with every step he took toward his escape, I was one step closer to ending his whole plan. The first sign was subtle. A missed call late one night. I had dismissed it at the time, thinking nothing of it. Victor was always busy. Always working. But then there was the phone call in the middle of the night. The one that came from a Dubai area code. He'd been asleep when it rang. But I couldn't ignore the strange urgency in his voice when he picked up. He told me it was nothing, just an important client, but something in his tone felt off. Like he was hiding something. I should have known. The late nights at the office started to become more frequent. He'd return home hours after midnight, always making excuses about emergency meetings, last-minute presentations. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust him. But trust is a fragile thing. And with every lie, every moment he evaded my questions, it started to crack. Slowly, the little signs began adding up. One night, I stumbled upon a document he forgot to close on his laptop. A list of transactions that didn't match up. My heart sank as I recognized the numbers. They didn't belong to our personal accounts, nor to the company's standard financial sheets. They were larger, more ominous. And then there was the offshore account, an account with a name I didn't recognize. Yet it was tied to him. I knew then, in that instant, that my worst fear was true. Victor had been stealing from his clients, funneling millions into accounts he thought no one would find. He had no idea that I'd already been one step ahead of him. When I first suspected something wasn't right, I didn't confront him. Instead, I took the evidence straight to the FBI. That's when Agent Lara Stone became a part of our lives. Though Victor would never know her true role. To him, she was just a beautiful new client, a woman eager to invest in our firm. He couldn't have been more wrong. Agent Stone was the best undercover agent I could have asked for. And she was about to help me bring down the man I once loved. I'll never forget the look on Victor's face when I first introduced him to her. He smiled, all charm, not realizing that every move he made was being watched by an army of agents. I watched as he flirted with her, oblivious to the fact that his carefully constructed world was about to crumble. As the FBI continued to gather intel, I sat in the background, my role as the supportive wife becoming more of a carefully planned strategy than anything else. I didn't say a word, even as the weight of the situation threatened to crush me. Every piece of evidence I uncovered was another nail in the coffin of my marriage. Another betrayal to add to the pile of lies Victor had been feeding me for months. There were nights I stayed up late, staring at the numbers, trying to make sense of the fraud. The scale of it all. I could almost feel his presence beside me, like an invisible weight pressing down on me. But I couldn't stop, not when I knew what was at stake, not when I realized how deep his deceit ran. Before I share what happened next, the moment that left an entire room of journalists in stunned silence, I want to connect with you. My amazing viewers, where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. By now, I was no longer the betrayed wife. I was someone who had seen the truth, who had found the cracks in the facade and was prepared to expose them. No matter the cost, the man I thought I knew, the one I had built a life with, was a stranger. But the most unsettling part wasn't the money, it was the fact that he'd never even seen me coming. And now, it was time to set the stage for what was about to unfold. I watched the airport terminal on my screen, my eyes scanning every movement, every subtle shift in the crowd. Victor was only a few steps away from slipping past security, his smug confidence barely hidden beneath the surface. He had no idea that every single step he took was being watched, analyzed, and anticipated. The live feed flickered for a second, then stabilized. I could see him clearly now, his arm around the waist of the woman he thought was his mistress. His face was lit with that same self-satisfied smirk, the one that always made him look like he had it all figured out. But this time, he was walking straight into a trap. And he didn't even know it. Target is approaching security. Agent Lara Stone's voice crackled through my earpiece. Calm and controlled. The kind of voice that could give orders in a war zone and still sound like she was discussing her favorite coffee. I pressed my fingers to my lips, steadying my breath. Remember, Lara, I spoke softly into the mic, barely above a whisper. He's carrying the backup drive with the transaction records. We can't let him dump it. Understood. We're in position, came her response, her tone unwavering. I leaned forward, hands shaking slightly as I watched Victor through the camera feed. His eyes flicked nervously to his phone again. It was clear he was getting anxious. He kept checking the time. Like every minute spent standing in that terminal was 1 minute too long. There was a tightness in his shoulders that betrayed the calmness he tried to project. The moment he thought he was getting away, he realized something was off. But by the time he figured it out, it would be too late. The woman beside him, who he thought was his partner in crime, was no more than a decoy, a brilliant piece of the plan that I had watched unfold for months. She moved with practiced ease, never too far from Victor, her hand on his arm, ensuring he wouldn't slip away. He had no idea that she was one of our top undercover agents. A shadow blending into his world, guiding him straight into the hands of the law. I watched the feed closely, noting every detail. His slow walk through the terminal, his constant glances at his phone, the way he kept checking the flight information board as if he was trying to convince himself he still had control over the situation. But this wasn't his escape. This was the beginning of his downfall. The eerie calmness of the whole operation made my pulse race. I had anticipated this moment for so long, but nothing could have prepared me for the cold thrill of watching it play out. Every move Victor made was one more step closer to the end of his game. I was no longer just observing the unraveling of his life. I was witnessing the culmination of months of meticulous planning. A plan that would leave him without the power he once wielded so easily. Target is getting restless. Lara's voice broke into my thoughts, pulling me back into focus. He's checked his watch 3 times in the last minute. I nodded, my eyes narrowing on Victor as he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His face was a mask of practiced nonchalance, but I could see it, the subtle shift in his expression. The way his jaw clenched just slightly, the tension building in his every movement. Something was happening, something was changing. I zoomed in on him. And then it hit me, the briefcase. It was my father's, the one he'd always kept by his side. The one that was supposed to hold the most precious memories. The one that had been passed down to me after his death. Victor was carrying it now. A sickening knot twisted in my stomach. Of all the things he could have taken, of all the ways he could have tried to hide the evidence, he chose that, the briefcase, the one place where my father had kept his most sacred documents. The one thing he had trusted to preserve the truth. And now, here it was, in Victor's hands, being used to carry the very evidence that would prove his guilt. I swallowed hard, steadying my breath. This wasn't just about the stolen money anymore. It was personal. My father's legacy was being manipulated, twisted, used to further Victor's lies. The betrayal cut deeper than I ever expected. It wasn't just my marriage that was crumbling. It was everything I thought I knew about trust. About love. About family. I looked at the security feed one last time. The pieces were all in place. Victor was about to make his move. But the trap was already set. The moment he thought he was free was the moment I knew I would bring him down. As his footsteps grew louder, the sense of finality in the air thickened. It was almost over. As I watched Victor pace through the terminal, the weight of the situation began to settle heavily on me. His every move felt like a betrayal. A reminder of everything he had stolen, not just from clients, but from me. It wasn't just the money, the lies, or even the affair. It was everything, the time, the trust, the quiet moments when I had believed in him, believed in us. How could I have been so blind? I remembered our first meeting, the late nights at the office, the stolen glances over takeout, the laughter we shared when we were both new hires at the firm. He had been so charming, so effortlessly captivating. He had seemed like everything I could ever want. And maybe he was, once. But now, the very thought of him made my stomach twist. The man I had trusted had been pulling the strings behind my back. Living a double life. Every moment we had shared felt like a lie. How many of those late nights were actually spent moving stolen money around? How many dinners had been nothing more than a cover for his schemes? I wanted to scream, to throw something, but instead, I sat there, still, watching the feed. The silence in the room was deafening. Then, as if the universe was mocking me, I saw it. There it was, in his hand, my father's briefcase. It took me a moment to register what I was seeing. My breath caught in my throat. The briefcase, the one that had belonged to my father. The one he had always carried with him when he was working on important documents. The same briefcase I had inherited after his death. My father's legacy. And now, it was in Victor's hands. I felt a cold wave wash over me. All the pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't about the scheme, the fraud, or the millions. This was about my father, his name, his legacy, everything he had worked for. Victor had been using my father's own belongings to hide the evidence. The betrayal ran deeper than I ever imagined. How had I not seen it? How had I not realized sooner that Victor wasn't just after money, but after something far more dangerous, my trust, my inheritance, my very identity? The anger bubbled up, sharp and bitter. The weight of everything I had lost in the last few months pressed down on me like a crushing wave. My father, who had always been the moral compass in my life, had been part of this fraud. And Victor knew it. He had used my father's influence, twisted everything he'd taught me, to manipulate me into trusting him. It made everything so much worse. As I stared at the screen, watching Victor walk confidently through the terminal, I realized just how far he had gone. This was no longer a simple case of financial theft. This was personal. He had used me, manipulated me, and now he was trying to destroy everything my father had built. For a moment, I thought I might lose control. The raw emotion of it all, the betrayal, the anger, the devastation, was overwhelming. But then I remembered what was at stake. I couldn't let him win. I couldn't let him tear everything down. Not when I was so close to exposing the truth. The tension in my chest tightened. But my resolve strengthened. I wasn't just going to take this lying down. I wasn't going to let him get away with any of it. He had thought he could pull off the perfect crime. But the truth was, it was never going to work. I was ready now. Ready to confront him. Ready to bring everything crashing down. The pieces were all in place. And there was no turning back. As the security cameras zoomed in, I could see the panic in his eyes. For the first time in weeks, Victor seemed unsure. His confidence was slipping away. And I was here for it. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. I reached for my phone, my fingers shaking as I typed a message. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the last time I ever had to look at him as my husband. The last time I ever had to feel anything but contempt for the man he had become. The game was over. I watched Victor, still blissfully unaware of the storm closing in around him. His grip tightened on the briefcase, and the air around him seemed to pulse with a strange, dangerous energy. He had no idea that every step he took, every second he spent in that terminal, was one more step toward his undoing. I could feel it, the rising tension in my chest, the finality of the moment. But just as I thought everything was falling into place, I received a message. My heart skipped a beat as I saw the name flash across the screen. Victor. The message read, "I know what you're doing. You think you've won, but I've got something you don't. If I go down, you're coming with me." For a brief, unsettling moment, my mind went blank. I could hear his voice in my head, calm and threatening, the words cutting through the air like a knife. The message didn't make sense at first. He was already being watched, tracked, caught in the act. So why was he so confident? Why did it feel like he had something I didn't know about? My hand shook as I typed a response, my thoughts racing. What are you talking about, Victor? What could you possibly have that I don't already know? Seconds later, my phone buzzed again. The message was short, direct, and chilling. "You'll see. I've sent something to your email. You might want to check it." A cold wave of dread washed over me. I hesitated for a moment. But then I opened my inbox. There, in the subject line, was a folder labeled Thomas Bennett Project Files, my father's name. My breath caught in my throat. I clicked it open, trembling, and the documents flooded the screen. Transaction records, emails, meeting minutes, all of them dating back to when my father was the CFO at Morton and Blake, 15 years ago. My mind reeled as I scrolled through the pages, the words blurring together as I tried to process what I was seeing. It was the same pattern, the same methods, the same exact game Victor had been playing for months. My father's name was in every file, his signature on every document. And as the realization hit, my heart dropped. Victor hadn't just been embezzling money. He had been using my father's blueprint, the fraud my father had been forced to build before his death. Victor had known. He had known about my father's involvement all along. And he had been waiting for this moment. The moment when he could use my father's past to trap me. To twist the situation around and make me look just as guilty. A cold anger bubbled inside me, pushing out the fear, the doubt, the pain. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me any longer. He had tried to control everything, the money, the scheme, even my emotions. But now, he had underestimated me. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, my fingers gripping the armrests. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. I couldn't let him win. I had to take control back. I pulled up the security feed again, watching as he neared the final security checkpoint. His confidence had returned, but I could see it now, the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He had thought he was one step ahead of me, but I was ready for him. I quickly typed a message, sending it with a calm that surprised even me. Interesting theory. Victor, have you shared this evidence with Lara yet? For a split second, there was silence, and then I saw it. Victor's expression faltered. His eyes darted to the side, to the woman who had been walking beside him, pretending to be his accomplice. In that moment, I knew he understood. He knew what I had done. He knew his whole plan had unraveled in the blink of an eye. A shaky breath escaped him as he glanced nervously at the woman beside him. Lara had him. She was already closing in on him, and there was nowhere left to run. But before the agents could make their move, Victor spun around, his face twisted with panic. He lunged for his phone, frantically typing a message, but it was too late. Lara stepped forward, her hand grabbing his arm with unshakable precision. Victor Anderson. Lara's voice was cold, authoritative. You're under arrest for embezzlement and corporate fraud. His smirk, the one he had worn for so long, faltered, but even as he was pulled away, his eyes met mine, and I saw it, the desperation, the last attempt to regain control. He wasn't going down without a fight. But this time, he had no power. The game was over. As he was escorted through the terminal, I couldn't help but feel a rush of relief. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for months, the weight of betrayal, of secrets, of lies, began to lift. It wasn't over, not yet, but this was the moment when everything had changed. And as I watched Victor being led away, a small smile tugged at my lips. He had underestimated me, and now, the truth was out. The echo of Victor's footsteps faded as he was led away, but the weight of everything still hung in the air. His arrest wasn't just the end of his scheme. It was the beginning of something I had never expected, redemption. But as I stood there, watching him disappear into the depths of the terminal, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more. There had to be more. I pulled my thoughts together. This wasn't over, not yet. The truth was just beginning to come to light. And I needed to make sure it stayed that way. I knew how deep the corruption ran. How much was at stake. Victor was just the tip of the iceberg. There were powerful people behind him. People who thought they were untouchable. People who believed they could hide forever in the shadows. I glanced at my phone again, scrolling through the files from my father. The ones I had uncovered earlier. They were damning. Proof of the vast network of deceit that had spread through Morton and Blake. And yet, it was all just the beginning. The files weren't just about Victor's fraud. They held the key to everything, my father's legacy, his forced involvement, the names of everyone who had been complicit in the scheme. The evidence was there, clear as day, and I was determined to make sure it all came out. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. My father hadn't been the mastermind. He had been forced into this web of deceit. He had been the whistleblower. And now it was up to me to finish what he had started. To make sure the truth didn't get buried, I made my way to the FBI office, my heart pounding in my chest. The weight of what I was about to do settled over me. This wasn't just about clearing my father's name. This was about exposing the entire corruption ring. About taking down the people who thought they could get away with everything. It was bigger than I ever imagined. As I entered the building, I saw Agent Lara Stone waiting for me. She was as calm and collected as ever. But I could see the glimmer of understanding in her eyes. We had both come a long way. Now, it was time to finish this. We've got everything we need. Maya, Lara said, her voice steady. The team's ready to move in. It's time. I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. The kind of justice that couldn't be bought. The kind that would dismantle everything they had built. The plan was set. We were going to take down the executives at Morton and Blake. Expose every last secret they had buried for years. My father's journals. The encrypted files he had left behind, they were the key. They proved that my father had tried to expose the fraud long before it went too far. But those who were in charge had silenced him. Now, it was my turn to make sure his voice was heard. Hours later, I found myself standing in front of my father's old office. Now a dark, empty room that smelled of dust and old paper. I ran my fingers along the desk. The same desk where my father had sat, making decisions that had ultimately cost him everything. But he hadn't backed down. He had fought until the very end. And now it was my turn to finish what he started. The team moved quickly. Lara was already on the phone, coordinating with the agents who were preparing to take down the corrupt executives. I could feel the rush of adrenaline building in my veins, the excitement and fear mixing into a powerful force that pushed me forward. I opened the drawer of my father's desk and, just as he had written in his journals, I found the hidden compartment. My heart raced as I pulled out the small USB drive. Its weight in my hand feeling like the weight of the world. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. I turned to Lara, my voice steady. This is it, the evidence. This is how we take them down. She took the drive, her eyes meeting mine with a look of understanding. We're going to bring them all down. Maya. I nodded, feeling a sense of closure wash over me. Victor had thought he could win, that he could control everything. But he had underestimated me. Underestimated the power of the truth. With the evidence secured, we moved quickly. It didn't take long for the arrests to begin. The board members, the CEOs, the ones who thought they were untouchable, all of them fell. Each one of them exposed for what they truly were, criminals. And as the final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, I could finally breathe. The news hit fast. Within hours, headlines were flashing across every screen. Massive fraud scheme uncovered at Morton and Blake. The CEO, the CFO, the entire board, they were all arrested. And the man who had once been my husband was behind bars, facing the consequences of his actions. But it was more than just a victory for me. It was a victory for my father. His legacy was no longer tainted by corruption. The truth had finally come to light. I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of everything that had happened sink in. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was the beginning of something new. A new purpose, a new direction, and as I looked at the evidence one last time, I knew one thing for sure: justice had been served. Before we wrap up, I'd love to hear what you think. What do you make of Maya's response to the betrayal and the truth she uncovered? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story intriguing, don't forget to hit that like button. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, make sure to click subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on more thrilling and captivating stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.